Hello. We would like to welcome everyone to Discover Tomorrow's MBA students today. This webinar is the latest edition in our In Good Company event series, where we seek to bring insights, thought leadership, and strategies to help higher ed marketers navigate the constantly changing environment. My name is Monica Dudosky, and I'm a lead client solutions manager on the LinkedIn's higher education team, and I'm going to be your host today. We're really excited to have with us today Andrew Crisp, who is the director of CarringtonCrisp, who will be sharing his soon-to-be-released research on prospective MBA students, who they are, what they're seeking, and barriers that they may encounter, and most important to you, how to engage with this 10 million prospective MBA students on our platform. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a bio on both of our speakers today. So Andrew, as I said before, he is the founder of CarringtonCrisp, along with Mary Lou Carrington, and this was founded back in 2003. Since that time, the business has worked with over 180 business schools and universities in 35 countries. They do consulting, creative, and research services. CarringtonCrisp is particularly known for its group research projects with business schools, and they also publish key research reports. Some examples include The Business of Branding, Generation Web, Tomorrow's MBA, Tomorrow's Masters and Alumni Matters, and the findings are often featured in media around the world, including Financial Times, The Economist, The Globe and Mail, and Poets and Quants. Andrew has also spoken at a number of different industry events, including AACSB, the Association of Asia Pacific Business Schools, Chartered Association of Business Schools, as well as many others. Andrew has considerable research and communication experience, having worked with branding agencies, such as the employment correspondent for the European newspaper, and as marketing director for an internet business. He also has experience in corporate communications, having led high impact projects, including advertising campaigns for Anderson Consulting and Citibank, and the rebrand for the London Business School. We're really excited to have him here today.
Thank you.
Our other speaker today, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Andrew.
All right.
Our other speaker today will be Lauren Hendevani, who is a senior account executive on LinkedIn's higher education team. She has over 12 years of consultative sales experience. Lauren is a lifelong learner and is passionate about connecting LinkedIn users to economic opportunity through education. She's a LinkedIn coach, as well as a diversity, inclusion, and belonging discussion circle lead. So as we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So number one, just due to the high volume of participants that we have today, we will be muting all lines. And while today will be an interactive discussion between our speakers, we also want to hear from you. So please place your comments and questions in the chat. And just to get everybody warmed up, you can go ahead and let us know what school or agency you're representing today and what is one thing that you're looking forward to learning today. If you have any tech issues, I do have a couple of colleagues on the line here, so please just use the chat and we'll try to assist you as best as possible. Lastly, please share on social just the great things that you learned today. You can use the hashtag #InGoodCompany with LinkedIn, and your feedback is important to us. So at the end, we will be providing a brief survey, and we would love to hear from you. And I saw one question already pop in the chat, great way to use it. And yes, we will be sending out the deck from today. So let's go ahead and get started. Andrew, are you ready?
I'm all ready, Monica. Thank you for that introduction. Here we go. So I'm delighted to join LinkedIn today and to share the findings from our new study. It's a study that actually has been running for 12 years now, every year. The report is out on Monday, and there'll be a link in the follow-up email to help you access more of the findings. This year's study had 668 prospective MBA students in 20 countries. About 24% are from North America. We make it an international study on purpose to give that flavor of the MBA, which is so often one of the most international programs on business school campuses. I should give some context. Of course, when we started 12 years ago, the world was gripped by a global financial crisis. Today, we're gripped by a pandemic, and the first couple of slides will focus on that, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But there's also a little more context that's important, I think. Just look back at GMAT testing. 2008-9, there were 130,000 tests taken by people in the US. 2018, that had come down to 74,000, and 20% of those were used for master's programs, PhDs, DBAs. So fewer than half the number who took the test a decade or more ago took it recently. And so the competition for MBA students has just grown enormously internationally, but amongst the providers that were already in the marketplace. And we've seen a proliferation of different types of MBA programs. And yet just last year, GMAT data on admissions and applications suggested a 2.4% increase in the numbers who were looking at business education and a postgraduate degree. But look more closely, and the MBA itself was only up by 0.6% in a full-time program. Look more widely though, the numbers looking for flexible MBAs, for online MBAs, for professional MBAs were quite often up by 40 or 50%. So there's a real interesting market that's emerging, and we'll touch on some of those things as we go through the survey today. So first of all, the good news. 70% in the survey said they're more likely to pursue an MBA than they were a year ago. And in North America, that goes up slightly higher to 75%. So enormous potential out there. The MBA as a brand still has a lot of currency, and that's important. But interestingly, a couple of other things in here. 70% are more likely considering all or most of their studies of their MBA online. Big change from where we were a decade ago, certainly. At 61%, because of COVID primarily, are considering studying a business school closer to home. If you're international, you're looking to go overseas to study your MBA, the thought of getting stuck somewhere else and not being able to get home, or maybe not even being able to get to campus in the first place, makes an enormous difference to your consideration. We look at a little bit more in this question when we asked about the impact of COVID, and there's a couple more interesting, 78% are interested in flexible study. The idea that perhaps they can switch between online and on campus. 66% are more likely to search for a school with lower fees than they were a year ago. 65% are considering other options, other ways of adding those business skills that are going to be so important as the economy begins to pick up again. So some interesting impacts from the COVID pandemic. I think what's really important is this isn't 2010. We have a breadth of ways of studying an MBA, as I said, but interestingly, the 2-year full-time is still the most popular single option, ahead of the 1-year full-time. But look a little more closely, and just like that GMAT data, 46% are looking for some sort of flexible MBA, whether it's a part-time, online, professional, blended, executive MBA, whatever name you want to call it. And specifically, 15% said their preferred way of study this year was an online MBA, up 4% on last year. That's actually an enormous increase for 1 year, from 11% to 15%. So people have had this experience, perhaps of working from home, but also perhaps doing some study from home. And they've seen what is possible. And they've seen the quality. Think back again to that first study. It wasn't until 2012 that the New York Times declared the year of the MOOC. The potential to do online study back in 2008-9 was negligible, at least in any quality way. The potential today is enormous, and we can see many new entrants to the MBA market, the Power MBA, the Not an MBA, the Quantic MBA. Whether they're really MBAs, that's a debate we can have later, but they're offering some of the business skills that MBAs deliver. And so the competition is growing all the time. We also ask about content in the survey in 2 separate questions. First, we ask about new areas of content that ought to be part of an MBA. These 4 areas: responsible management, global challenges, ethical leadership, diversity, equality, and inclusion. It's a new question in last year's study for the first time. And typically last year, about 40%, maybe slightly more, said they felt it was important, very important to have these subjects in there. This year, they've all become more important. 51% say responsible management should be a thread that runs through their MBA. There's interesting little differences. First of all, again, North America, we find 57% actually say responsible management is important. In younger candidates, it's global challenges and diversity, equality, and inclusion that are most important. perhaps a reaction to some of the societal movements we've seen emerge over the recent last 12 months or so. And slightly older candidates, it's more important to focus on responsible management and ethics. They've been in business, they have more experience, they've seen what the business world is actually like, and perhaps they recognize the importance of these topics to their career. And then on the right-hand side, we give people a list of, I think it's 30 pieces of content, and ask them which are the most valuable in their MBA studies, potentially the most valuable. And you've got sort of two parts of this. At the top there, the top three, pretty much mainstays of an MBA, a generic business and financial environment, business law with all the regulation that's around. Corporate finance has always been there, although interestingly, it slipped and has come back a little bit, perhaps because of the growth of the fintech sector. And then you have some interesting developments. So data analytics and decision making, 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been in the list, but it's steadily climbed and is now number 4. It's no surprise. So many programs now incorporate this. And go down a little bit further. Change management, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship. Again, they've all been around. Entrepreneurship, typically 15 to 20% say that's a driving reason for them to study an MBA. And then CSR, really connected into those topics on the left-hand side of the slide. First time I think we've seen it in the top 10 2 years running. And that's a major change in what people want to study. And then there's one other part about the changing nature of the MBA, different ways of approaching an MBA. So this was a new question this year. We gave people 4 options of different approaches to an MBA, and all of them garnered strong potential interest. People said they were very interested in potentially exploring these opportunities. 43% an MBA can study over several years when it suits me. So this idea that maybe I don't need all of the modules in an MBA right now. I specifically want finance, but I don't just want to go and study finance and get a certificate and go again. I want to have that opportunity over a period of years to add an HR, to add a marketing, to add a data analytics module. And at the end of it, add it together and say, I have an MBA. Why? Because that MBA is that recognized brand, recognized by employers, and it's portable, and I can take it from job to job. So that's so important. And some of the other things in here are saying the same sort of thing, but there's also this focus on lifelong learning that's coming through as well. So that second option from the top there, an MBA which offers opportunities to do further study at a low cost over the next 10 years to top up or add new skills. I was listening to the Dean of INSEAD today at a conference, and he made a perfectly obvious point. The idea is that you can't predict with any certainty the sort of skills that people will need to be successful in their careers in 20 years' time. It's hard enough to do it in 5 years' time, but definitely not possible in 20 years' time. So the opportunity for MBAs to top up, to reskill, and if that's built into the initial offer, becomes an incredibly exciting prospect going forward. We also ask about the skills that people want to develop as part of their MBA. So we know experiential learning is as important perhaps as some of the academic learning that goes on in an MBA. And there are 4 things that people prioritize. Leadership, no surprise. The MBA has always been about leadership. Self-confidence, communication, and negotiation. Negotiation's risen several places over the last few years. Perhaps it's the complexity of business that's pushed it up the agenda. People understand. Perhaps it's politics with a small p in the office situation that people think negotiation is important. Perhaps it's the international nature of business as well, where negotiation is important. And again, there are some little differences. It's interesting, we break the numbers down. North America, critical thinking comes in at number 3, ahead of communication and negotiation. If we look at women compared to men, then women more interested in entrepreneurial mindset as well as negotiation, much more so than men. And if you look at the younger group in this sample, so those who are 22 to 25, just beginning to think about doing an MBA, then adaptability, networking, and self-confidence. So they see how the business world is changing, and adaptability or flexibility, or whatever you want to describe it as, is increasingly important. And this penultimate slide, I just want to say a little bit about what's important when people are deciding where to study. And it's no surprise. This is the one thing you'll all say, well, we knew that anyway, but it's always good to get some reassurance. 4 of the top 5 items at the bottom of the slide there are all about career. And that is the purpose of doing an MBA. It's about enhancing employment opportunities. It's about making connections with business industry. It's about getting a work placement in a new sector, perhaps if you're changing sector. It's about the quality of the career services available on campus, or dare I say in the last 12 months, online for students. And all of those added together with the academic study, added together with the experience, are what makes a top quality MBA. So I think by way of conclusion, that this is what we're really talking about. We're talking about a new MBA for a new world. We all know how society is changing. It's going to change even more rapidly and in ways perhaps we haven't ever predicted because of the pandemic of the last 12 months. But the brand MBA remains incredibly popular with students and with employers. And if an MBA can be developed that provides different ways for different types of students to acquire the business skills and to keep adding to those skills, to reskill themselves as they go forward, then that's an incredibly exciting future for an MBA for a new world. I'll pause there and we'll open it up to questions, and I look forward to the debate. But thank you for listening this evening.
Thank you, Andrew. It's really great to get a sneak peek at some of the research that you have done, and really looking forward to spending some time to go through a few more questions. And as I mentioned before, just to all the participants, please feel free to use the chat if you have any questions that you would like to be asked to Andrew or Lauren. So we had a nice overview of this study. And so as you had mentioned before, this is the 12th annual study that you've conducted on MBA students. Can you share some things that are similar to the time period that you did the study during the last economic downturn and the time period of today?
Yeah, certainly. I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, leadership is a great starting point. It's always been a core of a good MBA program. Students who are taking an MBA have that expectation that it's a stepping stone to a more senior position. For some, it's a stepping stone to the C-suite. And being able to lead more effectively, and especially today, that nature of leadership may have changed because you're leading virtual teams, not necessarily physical teams, but it's still leadership. And so I think more than anything else, that is a thread that has run through the last decade of the MBA research we've done.
Yeah, that's really really interesting to think about, how things have changed from one very challenging period to the next, especially the point about virtual leadership, because that's not something that would have been anticipated in the past. We did have a question that came in the chat while you were going through the slides. Do you mind clarifying the percentage of respondents that were in Canada specifically?
Yeah, so that of that 24% that I said were North America, that was about 16% USA and 8% Canada.
Okay, great, thank you. And so kind of on this question of thinking about trends and thinking about comparing the results that you saw this year to the past, do you mind telling us again, just some additional trends that you've been seeing in comparison to past studies?
Yes, certainly. I think some of the core elements, career again, a thread that runs through it. But it really, what is fascinating, I think, is that content piece and how that's changing, as well as how people can study an MBA. So I don't have to go to campus. I don't have to give up my career. I can continue to study. I can continue my career at the same time. And there are a variety of flexible options. We just talked about Canada. Athabasca have long had an online program, but those online programs are now proliferating. And so there are more opportunities for people to use. For a long while, they tended to attract domestic audiences. But the pandemic has opened up the possibility for people who said, well, I could never travel, take time out, go to a Harvard or a Wharton or wherever. But there are top schools now offering online, at least components to their MBA, even if not a fully online MBA, or they're offering online programs as an entry point to an MBA. So I think that's a really interesting challenge, and it does make the market more international. We had a discussion today at this conference I was at about whether location would remain important to an MBA offer. And it's certainly going to be less important because you can study anywhere from anywhere. So that's an important change that schools will have to get to grips with, I think.
Yeah, so it'll definitely be interesting to watch this play out over time as well. So as I mentioned before, this is going to be an interactive session. So we are going to get ready to launch our first poll question, just so we can get a little bit of audience feedback on what you guys have found interesting so far with the research that's been presented. So our first poll question. So what is the most valuable insight that Andrew shared as part of his research? Was it the 70% of respondents more likely to pursue an MBA than a year ago, the 46% preferring part-time online, blended, or executive, 43% interested in an MBA they could study over several years, or 52% that think it's very important that content about responsible management is part of their degree? So we'll give you a second just to answer it, and we'll take a look at the results once they come in. And while you are answering those questions, Lauren, I'm going to direct over to you. So from your perspective, what was the most insightful part of this research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I personally wear two hats from the perspective of evaluating this data. One is a partner to higher education marketers. So, I'm interested in how this will impact them and the ways that they can focus. But also, I was a person in these shoes deciding to potentially pursue a management degree. And so it's really interesting for me to see the data from that perspective, because I was one of these people making these decisions, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So for me, one of the things that's really fascinating is just the diversity of MBA topics and what people are most interested in by age. You heard Andrew saying that like a younger segment is really interested in a more global looking degree program or set of information, as well as diversity and inclusion is really valuable to them. When you move up, a little bit in terms of that age group from 26 to 32, they're really interested in responsible management and ethical leadership. So you can see these shifts that are happening already, kind of in a minute area of age difference. And I think what we're seeing is a shift from checking a box, right? Like going to an MBA, checking a box, and really looking for a more specific or even customized MBA, because I think we're never gonna really shake off the value of an MBA program and what that means, and that having that degree will always be transferable and valuable. But I find that I think people like me, people who are making this decision now, have a really customized focus and interest in customizing their programs. And so I think it's really interesting to see that represented in the data here, that level of customization, the way that the interest is so diverse across the set of respondents.
Great, thank you so much for sharing perspective. So the results are in. It looks like most people on the call were really, found interesting that 70% of the respondents are more likely to pursue an MBA than they were a year ago, followed by just a high percentage of people that were interested in a more flexible option, whether that's part-time or blended. Personally, I thought the study over several years was very interesting. That's definitely capturing those lifelong learners that are out there. Lauren, just one more question for you. So Lauren, Andrew had mentioned that 70% of the respondents in market weren't necessarily in market a year ago. Can you talk about the corresponding increase in demand on the LinkedIn side of things? Like, what are you seeing in terms of engagement, demand on LinkedIn, like for this MBA audience?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that interest in our platform goes hand in hand, with economic downturn, which also goes hand in hand with pursuing education. So when you have these moments of unrest in the economy, that's an opportunity as much as it is anything else to pursue new options, make new connections, consider a different career path. And we obviously are the place for that, the place that those conversations are happening every day. And so we really saw explosive growth in the last year in terms of engagement, 135% growth in engagement. We also saw 376% more engagement with our LinkedIn Learning offering. So we know that there is a massive new set of learners that are interested in making these decisions in the next 3 to 6 months. And an MBA is just a part of that. But historically, LinkedIn has always been a great place to find MBAs, the ability to reach these people with our targeting. What I think is really the challenge now for higher education marketers is how do they present, what their benefit is or their specific offering? How do they break through the clutter really of all these new opportunities as we have the ability to really access all these different programs online? How can they really tell their story in a way that gets their message across effectively?
Right. Yeah. It's great that there's so much interest out there, but how do you make sure that your, particular offering is really coming across? It's a really great point. So I now have a question for the both of you. So when we're thinking about, the research results overall, what trends do you think that they're speaking to? So, what do you think are going to be more short-term trends versus some of these trends that are going to have a lasting impact?
Let me kick off. I think the first one is the one that we just finished on, which is online. It's clearly here for the long term now. There was already movement beforehand. I think the last Babson study I saw in the States said something like 6 million students were already taking at least one online class. And this was a couple of years before the pandemic hit. We've been through the last 12 months, delighted, with look as though there's a way out of it, but not everybody is going to come back to campus. And even those that do come back to campus will probably look to do some study online. There is a sense of a digital thread that is now going to run through degree programs. It might be beforehand, it might be during, it might be after, but it will be there in some part, supporting, enabling, perhaps delivering a large part of the actual learning content. But also, it'll be important for the networking, the connecting students globally in some cases. It'll be important for delivering career services and connections with business and with alumni who can help. It'll be important in almost every aspect. You've got a generation. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. She's learning online, homeschooling now. And she thinks nothing of doing things that way because her life has been a digital life. And there will be many like that who expect that, but also a generation who've had to work from home digitally over the last 12 months, who have also now begun to say, that's interesting. We could learn online as well. So that's the real one that's here for the long term.
Yes, definitely agree and see that. Lauren, do you have any thoughts on that, just in terms of like short-term versus long-term trends?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what I was saying before, and I think it references my personal experience. I think customization is really key. I think that we're going to be seeing less of companies saying, okay, go off for 2 years or spend 2 years, for every weekend getting this management degree, and then we'll promote you, and seeing a lot more of potential students, saying to their managers, I'm interested in learning more about sustainability, or I'm interested in learning more about organizational behavior. And I would love for that to add up to an MBA in the end, but I have a very, intended focus on how I want to, what I want to take away from this. I want to be able to quantify the value of this investment in time and money. So I think customization in whatever format that exists, whether it's stackable or just having custom tracks or capstones or whatever it is, I think customization is going to be extremely impactful and is going to really be able to set different programs apart, because I think that's what the growing consumer of an MBA is seeking. The flexibility, the customization.
Right. Yeah. I can definitely see that this the options for different areas of study here to stay for the long term. So switching gears a little bit. So as we all know very well, COVID and the economic downturn has had a disproportionately negative impact on different communities, whether it be people of color or women. Some are even calling this the female recession, as an estimated 890,000 women have left the workforce. Do you have any insight on, these specific demographics and, maybe their need or even desire to attain an MBA?
I think we can speak a little bit about women, particularly compared to the male audience and the overall audience in the marketplace here. And there were a couple of statistics in the presentation. There certainly seems to be greater interest amongst women and men in studying online. And that may be because of the additional flexibility it offers. If you've lost your job, but perhaps you have a family, the ability to work flexibly around other commitments somehow makes the online proposition more attractive than the possibility of going away to study full time. But equally though, if you've lost your job, maybe that's the opportunity to go and study full time. But there definitely seems to be more interest in that online proposition. Not enormous, but a noticeable difference. There's a little bit of difference in terms of the skills that people want, that women want in terms of going forward. As I mentioned earlier on, the entrepreneurial mindset. Again, if you've lost your job, perhaps your next thought is, do I really want to go back to where I was? Or maybe I've got a business idea. Maybe I want to think about developing that and take this opportunity to spend some time doing that and getting some learning to support that. So there are some interesting small differences. I don't think they're enormous, but they are there in the data.
Great perspective. So looks like we just got a question in the chat. Did the research study ask any questions regarding the cost of an MBA? So whether that's an on-campus or online?
It didn't this year. We have done it in the past. We change around a few questions each year. My sense is that whilst there was that one question as part of the broader ones in the COVID piece that said more people might be looking for a school offering lower fees, we haven't done the connection to see whether that resonates with those who prefer online compared to on campus. We can certainly cut the data that way and have a look. My sense is it's less about cost. Of course, cheaper online programs, the Boston offering, for instance, opens up that possibility. But it's a little bit back to what Lauren was talking about earlier, which was customization. I was going to say personalization, and it's about finding a fit. It's about finding the right institution that fits with your values, with your ambitions, and with your circumstances. And we've often found that people have said, I'm willing to pay more than I originally expected if I think I'm going to get a better career outcome at the end of the period of study. So there's a certain trade-off there that says, if I can see a better return on investment, I'll make that investment.
An excellent point. And Brad had a really interesting question, kind of / comment. Could it be that the reason women are more interested online is because the MBA stigma is more male dominant?
Wow, it's a great question, Brad. If you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I might have said yes. You look at the data, and a lot of schools have grown the female cohort in their full-time MBA programs over the last 5 years. And I think that stigma, that perception of a macho environment on campus in the MBA classes has largely disappeared. I'm sure it exists in 1 or 2 places still. And so I think it's less of an issue than it was. Certainly, study online, it gives you a degree of anonymity, of course. You could be anyone, anywhere, and that maybe makes it easier for some people. But I don't think it's as much of an issue as it was historically.
I know Monica and I have heard that with some of the clients that we work with, that there is this level of interest in diversifying their participants and either encouraging more female participation in their cohorts, or even just a more diverse set of backgrounds, like less finance, more CPG, more sustainability, just a more diverse group. And it had not dawned on me to think about the framework or the way that these programs are run having an impact on who attends them. But now that I've seen this research and I see that there is a tendency for women to prefer more flexibility, which makes sense given what's going on right now, and also that generally they're responsible for most of the caretaking, that actually kind of had a light bulb effect for me of really understanding, maybe if you seek diversity, if you and your programs are looking for a certain level of diversity, maybe doing some research into the way that your program is now, and to understand what about it currently, whether it's branding or functionality or lack of flexibility or optimization or customization rather, is that what's having an impact? Is that what's driving us getting the same people over and over again? I think that's a really interesting way to reevaluate, the way maybe your program is being perceived, and trying to integrate some customization into that to really welcome and encourage diversity from these different, groups of people or backgrounds or what have you.
Excellent point. And I think that kind of ties in with brand and marketing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, about, how are you perceived and how do you want to be perceived? So the way you go to market, what does your creative look like? What are you speaking to even in the copy? So excellent points on both accounts. So we're going to switch topics a little bit and talk about school selection criteria. So in your research that you've conducted, what would you say are the top criteria that students are looking for in a program?
A degree that gets me a better job than I started with. That's the bottom line. It really is. Every year, that is what dominates. Motivation to study, earning potential, job security, perhaps more so this year than other years, and accelerating promotional path. So those are the three things that tend to dominate. You then look at the slide I put up, opportunity for a work placement, particularly if I'm switching career. If I can get some time and internship with an organization in the direction I want to travel, even if I don't end up getting a full-time job there, that's incredibly important. Alumni who've been recruited into the sectors I'm interested in, really valuable. Although what is interesting is we do find that students don't see the value of alumni associations until they actually start their program. They don't quite make that connection, but once they get onto campus, they become incredibly valuable. Yes, I go back to the point I made earlier, values and personalization. This has got to be a fit for me, especially if I'm going to do a 2-year study on campus. I'm going to give up 2 years of my life and I'm going to mix with this group of people in this sort of environment. It's got to be right for me. I've got to enjoy it as well as know that there's a great career at the end of it.
Right. Lauren, I'm interested to, if you don't mind sharing with the group, like what criteria was important for you when you were making the decision to go back to school?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, because I did start my journey thinking that I would go to like a full-time program or like a part-time 2-year program, and ended up taking the GRE, which was, I didn't even want to touch the GMAT. So I was looking only at programs that would accept the GRE. Ultimately decided that I didn't want to commit, that much time. Revisited it later and found an option. It's not actually technically an MBA, but it is a management focused degree that allowed me to really customize my learning path and let me decide, what different things I wanted to study, what I wanted to focus on that would ultimately give me the skills that I think would give me value in my career trajectory. So, but I will say that, it's from a reputable institution. So brand, was really important to me. But also what was really important to me was the ability to have access. It's a blended program. So I can take classes on campus. I don't live in the location of my of the campus. So the majority of my study is online, but I do have access to that location if I need it. And I think one thing that was really important to me was not feeling less than, not feeling like because the majority of my study was happening online, that I was not a valued member of this community. And I think that that is something, that we really should keep in mind, that an online offering is not any less valuable, and the students in that offering are not any less worthy. So I'm hoping, and I feel like with the changes that we've seen, that there is no longer going to be, that kind of stigma against online learning, that it is less than, or or different or less valuable. So
I'm just going to come back in there because that's a really important point that Lauren makes. One of the things, we did a big study for a British university last year, and we asked employers exactly that point. And actually, they are incredibly open now to people with online degrees because they've done some online learning. And we sense we're at a little bit of a tipping point. So those who are doing recruitment now, perhaps in their early 30s, when they studied, it was all face-to-face. But the group who are coming through will have had some experience of online. So when they see a CV that has got an online degree on it, or has got an online certificate or something like this, it won't be a surprise to them, first of all. They'll understand the context, and they're likely to be much more open and won't put it on a different pile from the person who's studying full-time on campus. So it's a really important point that Lauren makes.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think it really helps even put all of this research into perspective, as well as your unique duality as a higher ed marketing partner. So thank you again. On this note, the Financial Times will soon release their annual rankings. How important was school rankings to the respondents when you were doing this research? And were there certain groups or segments that relied on rankings more than others?
Rankings are incredibly important still. I commented on a post on LinkedIn about them today. I think Captain has just released a report saying that a number of schools are going to skip the rankings, and we know that the Economist rankings this year had a number of schools that weren't taking part. The comment I made was, well, if you skip the rankings, you're probably going to have to increase your marketing spend because they are a proxy for quality. Well, however good they are, whatever the questions people have about the data and the way it's collected, people do see the brands associated with them, like the Financial Times, like Business Week, and they see that as a reassurance, especially if you're an international student. Perhaps you don't know the schools as well as a domestic student would. They're incredibly important. And we have another survey where we ask students about best practice on business school websites, and we ask them about what's the most important content on a school website. Number one, of course, is course details. Number two, consistently for the last 5 years of that study, has been rankings. It's not going to be a deciding factor, but it's a reassurance. It's useful shortlisting, and where the rankings splice their data up, and you can see different criteria within the rankings, we're going back to that customization. You can find the fit. This is a school that's good for entrepreneurship. This is a school that has a large percentage of women in the cohort. Whatever it might be, that can be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have the ability to see, of all of the partners we work with in higher education who are advertising their different master's programs or MBAs or what have you, we can see of their own creative, all of it together, what is popping, what's most engaging, what are people reacting to? And overwhelmingly, it's number one in this, or number two in this, or number three in this. And it doesn't even have to be, we are the best MBA program in the world. It's just this idea of recognizing, exactly as you said, Andrew, what are we great at? What are we proud of? What do we offer? And owning that and sharing that, because even if it is not, top 10 MBA programs in the country, but we have like the number one sustainability researcher or whatever, it always seems to catch the attention of our users, number one, number two, number three. So, as we talk more about branding, leaning into the value that you provide, sharing it in that way is something to note, just across the board, but also as you are going out, building your creative or trying to get your message across, integrating that into the message.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think also a nice segue to have the discussion about, brand and marketing. We talked about earlier, the fact that there is a large pool of prospective students, but, really wanting to make sure that your particular MBA program really stands out. So, given the competitive environment, like what do you guys recommend that schools do to help themselves stand out? I know you talked about rankings and featuring that in creative, but is there anything else?
It's the duality again, as it always has been, the strategic and the tactical. So the brand, making sure that the values are clearly expressed, finding a way to communicate those values. What is it that makes us special or makes us different? And differentiation is very difficult in an MBA environment where the core programs are perhaps very similar in different places. And I think one opportunity that so many schools still miss out on is leveraging their research. These are academic institutions with large numbers of people working in fascinating areas. And it can be difficult to communicate academic research sometimes, but there are some schools that do it very well. One I often quote in the Netherlands, Rotterdam School of Management. Go to their website, they've got a page called Discovery, where they take their best research and turn it into short articles or short videos. And those videos get watched by managers in corporates who then say, I didn't know you did this. This is exactly the sort of issue we're trying to tackle in our organization. I want to know more. I potentially want to study this subject. Do you have it in your MBA? Do you have it in your executive education? So leveraging research, I think, is a missed opportunity for quite a number of schools.
Excellent point. Lauren, did you have anything to add to that? I know you talked a lot about just different ways to stand out in terms of diversity.
I mean, I think that there is a real challenge for MBA marketers right now from the perspective that it used to be very clear who was the right person for the full-time 2-year on-ground MBA, who was the right person for the weekend MBA, who was the right person for the part-time, maybe online, flexible MBA, who was the right person for executive education, right? That I think now is really blurry across who it makes sense for what, because a lot of these programs, when they all went online, looked very similar to each other. And so the real, we talked about customization, which I think is a little different than differentiation. I think it's really important for higher education marketers, in their brand presence, when they're marketing the programs, to be really clear about what the difference is between their own offerings. Because in my personal experience, when I was evaluating different options, some on-ground MBAs, some online, some not even actual MBAs, it was a lot of work as the consumer to really understand what is the difference, let's say between getting an exec ed or an online non-accredited or an accredited that can lead to something. Like there's a lot of confusion, and it's a lot of work for the consumer. And I think if higher education marketers can be really clear about the values and the differences, and almost even compare and contrast on their websites what the offerings are, I think that's going to be really helpful and really allow you to kind of get that cycle from lead to enrollment to be a little bit shorter.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much for just kind of engaging in this great conversation. I know we are kind of coming towards the end of the time, so I just want to encourage anyone with any questions to please add them to the chat. I see we already have a few that we'll get to, but if anyone has been kind of sitting on a question, please feel free to put it in the chat now. So I'll start off with the one from BH. Do you know of any schools that have continuing education built into their MBA?
So I can't remember which one it is. I don't know if it's Kellogg or Michigan Ross. It's somebody like that who have now said to their MBA graduates, you can come back, and do executive programs with us rather, you'll sit in a class that's already taking place. So we're not setting up programs specifically for you, but you'll have that opportunity. And I think they offer so many times in a decade or something like that. So there aren't many examples that I'm aware of, but you begin somewhere. And I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of trend grows.
Great. So I believe we are going to be, oh, it looks like Carla mentioned that her school actually, that she works, actually does offer that. So we are going to be launching a poll right now. So please go ahead and cast your answers. And so Royal Roads University looks like they do offer the continuing education. Great. And while people are answering the poll, Andrew, do you see or have you heard of any schools partnering more in the future to offer more robust course offering based on the school's strength?
So we see this a lot in the executive MBA marketplace. There are quite a number of joint programs. And in fact, if you look at the FT ranking of executive MBA programs, then the top 10 is almost made up exclusively of joint programs. I think we'll see more of it as well. It may be that you'll not actually travel to that other school, but you might do that joint course online. So you can avoid the travel if there's an issue with that. So I think that there will be more of that. INSEAD perhaps is the best example, going back probably close to 20 years now. They had the campus in France, but also in Singapore. So there wasn't a joint program between schools, but it meant that students could have an exposure to Europe and an exposure to Asia. And that was an incredibly powerful offer at that time. And I think we'll see more of those sorts of combinations, certainly.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to give Andrew and Lauren, any chance if you guys have any closing remarks, any like last piece of advice for our marketers that are here with us today. Give you guys a second.
I'll quote somebody else. There was a great article I read last year, an interview with the Minister for Education in Singapore. And in it, he talked about how at the National University of Singapore, they were now enrolling students as undergraduates, not for 3 or 4 years, but for 20 years. And they'd made the jump that said, you don't need to front load all your education necessarily. Perhaps you'll do a year or two of an undergraduate program and then you'll start working. But then you'll come back in 3 years or in 5 years or 12 years because you need to update. Back to this point that the INSEAD dean made earlier today, I said, yeah, how can we possibly know the skills that we'll all need in 20 years' time? And one hit of education will never be enough. So there is a real opportunity, I believe, for business schools to reinvent, repurpose, renew, create an MBA, as I said at the conclusion of my presentation, that is fit for tomorrow's world, that can continue to develop skills, that can continue to educate, that can create, opportunity for people as their careers grow and change. And that's what the MBA has always been about. We just need to make it fit for purpose for the 21st century.
Thank you. Lauren, I don't know if you had any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw Claudio's, question, which said, do students looking for a 2-year full-time MBA care about values? And at what point in the funnel is this most important? And I think people really do, care about values. And I couldn't even tell you what the values of the school of the program I'm in are, right? So I think it is important to be leading with that message. Anything that sets you apart, anything that you are behind or for, or sets the tone for the culture of the program, especially when it is full time and you're going to be committing so much time and money to this. I think the question of when, right, to present that is a great question. And what we see on our platform, and I think a trap that some higher education marketers fall into, is once they collect the lead, they think their job is done, right? So they think that a person will call and schedule an opportunity to talk to, an admissions counselor, and they'll get to tell their story and it will be great. What I think we're seeing that's a lot different here with the amount of opportunities that are out there now and all the access and the way that has been opened up, is that people are doing a lot of research on their own. And so re-messaging them, reminding them, getting in front of them as many times as you can after you collect the lead is a great time to talk about those values. So for example, on our platform, one way that we've seen work really excellently is driving all the leads, driving people to your site, getting them there for a first look, tagging your site with our insight tag, and then re-messaging everyone with a message ad, which is super custom, it's one-to-one, and talking then about the values and the experience of what it's going to be like on campus. Because essentially what we've seen is anyone that is super active on the platform right now, and that's the only person that will be receiving those message ads, it's a high indicator that they want to make a move. It's a high indicator that they want to go change their job or get on a new career path or get a new skill. So those users that are active on the platform are essentially raising their hands and saying that they want to know more. And it's your opportunity to get in front of them at that time when they're making that decision, when they're in the research phase. And I think that's perfect. You've already collected the lead, they're interested, they've hit your site. Now tell them all about the amazing things that you have to offer, the values you stand for, and the way they're going to be a part of that value system when they join your organization.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Andrew, for those excuse me, closing remarks. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As we said earlier, the deck and the research, the recording of today's session will all be sent to you via email. Your account executive will be in contact with you. But again, thank you so much for choosing to spend an hour of your day with us. We hope you learned a lot. Thank you.